Welcome to your own personal deep dive, just for you. So today we're diving into the life and work of Charles Darwin, a man who really fundamentally changed how we see ourselves and the world around us.
Absolutely.
We've got some cool stuff to work with here, excerpts from his Wikipedia page, and a really fascinating biographical overview.
Yeah.
So our mission is to unearth, I guess, the essence of Darwin's story.
Right.
Figure out why he still matters so much today.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe uncover a few things along the way that might surprise us.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because, Darwin wasn't always the revolutionary figure we know him as today. His journey was full of, I guess you could say, twists and turns, almost like a species adapting to its environment.
It really is amazing when you think about how he started out. He was born in 1809 into a wealthy family, doctors and financiers. But here's the thing. Both sides of his family were really well known for their strong abolitionist views.
Yeah.
Imagine the kind of legacy that creates for a young man.
Right? It is quite a legacy, and it makes his own personal journey with ideas about racial equality even more intriguing.
Yeah.
As we delve into his life, particularly his travels, we'll see how he grappled with these complex issues. And it reminds us that even brilliant minds are shaped by their times.
Absolutely. And speaking of being shaped by his time, young Charles actually hated medical school. Which must have been a bit of a disappointment for his doctor father.
Right.
But instead, he preferred to learn taxidermy from a freed slave named John Edmonston.
Wow.
Who was actually described as a pleasant and intelligent man.
Interesting.
It makes you wonder how these early interactions with Edmonston might have influenced Darwin's later work on, race and the origins of humanity.
It's a crucial point to consider. Yeah, this seemingly random skill taxidermy actually provided Darwin with essential experience in observation and dissection.
Right.
Skills that proved invaluable to his scientific work later on.
That's a great point. It's like that one class you took in college that you thought was totally useless at the time, but then it ends up being surprisingly relevant to your career.
Right.
Speaking of unexpected turns, Darwin's father then steered him towards theology,
Okay.
hoping he'd become a clergyman.
Uh-huh.
But Charles was much more drawn to beetles and the natural world.
Yeah.
He even joined this student group called the Quinian Society that was known for its radical discussions, challenging traditional religious views on science.
Really?
So it sounds like those clergyman aspirations were fading fast.
They certainly were. Yeah. This really highlights a recurring theme in Darwin's life. Following his passion.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the pressure he must have felt to follow a predetermined path?
I know.
But his curiosity and love for nature kept pushing him in a different direction.
Right.
And thankfully, for us, it did.
Absolutely. So let's fast forward to 1831. Darwin, just 22 years old at the time, is offered a position on the HMS Beagle.
The Beagle.
A 5-year voyage around the world as the ship's naturalist. What do you think it was like for Darwin setting sail with only his curiosity and those rudimentary tools facing the vastness of the ocean and the unknown?
It's hard to overstate the significance of this voyage.
Yeah.
Picture Darwin surrounded by an incredible diversity of life, observing subtle variations between species on different islands. It was a living laboratory for the development of his ideas. And critically, during this voyage, he read Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology,
Yes.
a book that would completely reshape his thinking.
Yes. Lyell argued that the Earth's features were sculpted over vast periods by everyday processes we see today.
Right.
Things like erosion and sedimentation.
Yeah.
This uniformitarianism, as it's called, really shifted Darwin's perspective on how change happens over time, moving away from the idea of sudden catastrophic events. It really laid the groundwork for his own groundbreaking theory.
Exactly. And then we have the incredible stops on this epic voyage, Brazil, where Darwin was profoundly disturbed by the horrors of slavery.
Right.
Further shaping his views on the shared humanity of all people, Patagonia, where he unearthed fossils of giant extinct mammals alongside modern seashells, prompting questions about extinction change and the immensity of geological time.
Then there's Tierra del Fuego, where he encountered the native Fuegians. Their way of life was so different from his own, it challenged his preconceived notions of civilization.
Yeah.
It pushed him to consider the common origins and potential of all humans, which was a radical idea at a time when many people labeled indigenous populations as savages.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there are the Galapagos Islands. This is where those famous finches with their beaks adapted to different food sources really provided Darwin with his ha-ha moment. Seeing them firsthand gave him a glimpse into the power of adaptation and how species could diversify over time.
And let's not forget about Australia. This is where he encountered creatures like the platypus and the rat-kangaroo animals so unique, they made him seriously question the prevailing idea of a single creator designing each species independently. It's almost as if nature was showing off its boundless creativity, pushing Darwin further down the path of evolutionary thinking.
Indeed. And it's also worth noting that Captain Fitzroy, despite his later support for a literal interpretation of the Bible, played a significant role in both shaping Darwin's ideas during the voyage and helping him to publish his work.
So 5 years later, Darwin returned home. Not just a seasoned traveler, but with notebooks overflowing with observation specimens from all over the world and the seeds of a revolutionary idea firmly planted in his mind. When we left off, Darwin had just returned from that epic voyage on the Beagle. His head was brimming with these revolutionary ideas, but still facing years of work ahead to actually turn those observations into a fully formed theory.
He returned to celebrity in those scientific circles, but also burdened by this mysterious illness that would plague him for years to come. And this is where the real work begins. Years of meticulous research, painstakingly piecing together the puzzle of how life on Earth has changed over time.
Like a behind-the-scenes montage in a movie. Except instead of a training sequence, we have Darwin dissecting barnacles, consulting with experts, and connecting all these seemingly disparate ideas.
Exactly, all while battling recurring bouts of illness that baffled doctors for years. But Darwin's drive was incredible. He pressed on, fueled by this insatiable curiosity and the weight of a world-changing idea slowly taking shape.
Speaking of barnacles, I have to admit, they don't exactly scream excitement. But his 8 years studying these creatures were more than just a side project.
Right, absolutely not. You see, studying barnacles wasn't a detour. It was essential. Darwin was finding homologies, similar body parts in different species that have been adapted for different purposes.
Okay.
This suggested a common ancestor, a shared blueprint that had been modified over time. He even found tiny males living as parasites on hermaphrodites. This showed him a possible evolutionary pathway for how distinct sexes could evolve and how variations within a species were key to understanding the process.
Wow, that's way more interesting than I imagined. And all this intense research earned him the Royal Society's Royal Medal in 1853, solidifying his reputation as a serious biologist.
But there's another piece of the puzzle that falls into place around this time, and it comes from a rather unexpected source. Economics. Remember Thomas Malthus, the economist whose work Darwin had read years earlier on the Beagles?
Oh, right, Malthus. The one with the rather bleak predictions about population growth outstripping resources, leading to famine and struggle. Not exactly light reading.
True. But Darwin saw a deeper connection to the natural world in Malthus's work.
Okay.
Malthus argued that human populations tend to grow faster and the resources needed to sustain them. This creates competition, what he called a struggle for existence. Darwin realized that this principle applied not just to humans but to all living things.
So it's not all just about cooperation in nature, there's a darker side to it as well.
Yes, Darwin saw that within this struggle for existence, individuals with even slight variations that gave them an advantage, better camouflage, stronger beats, faster speed, were more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass those traits on to their offspring. Over generations, these tiny variations could accumulate, ultimately leading to the formation of entirely new species.
And that's the essence of natural selection, right? It's like nature is constantly running this grand experiment, favoring those best suited to their environment at any given time.
Precisely. He called it natural selection, in contrast to the artificial selection practiced by breeders who intentionally chose desirable traits in their plants and animals. It was a revolutionary insight that explained how life on Earth has diversified into the incredible array of species we see today.
So by the mid-1850s, Darwin had this groundbreaking theory in hand. But he didn't rush to publish it. Why the delay? What was he waiting for?
It's a question that's fascinated historians for years. Part of it was his meticulous nature. He wanted overwhelming evidence, anticipating the controversy he knew his ideas would ignite. He was also still battling those health issues, often unable to work for extended periods. But there's also another factor that comes into play, the story of Alfred Russel Wallace.
Ah, yes, Wallace, the naturalist working in the Malay Archipelago. That's quite a plot twist.
Absolutely. In 1858, Darwin received a letter from Wallace outlining a theory strikingly similar to his own natural selection. Imagine Darwin's surprise. After years of working in isolation, someone else had independently arrived at the same revolutionary conclusion.
It's like a scientific race to the finish line. Did Darwin try to beat Wallace to publication?
Not at all. He could have tried to claim sole credit, but in a display of remarkable integrity, he consulted his close friends Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker, who arranged for a joint presentation of both their papers at the Linnean Society on July 1, 1858.
Wow.
This act of collaboration ensured both men received recognition for their independent discovery.
That's an incredible story of scientific collaboration. But the story doesn't end there, right? This was just a prelude to Darwin's masterpiece on the origin of species.
Exactly. Spurred on by Wallace's letter, Darwin finally sat down to write a more accessible account of his theory, a book that would change the world forever.
Last time we left off with Darwin finally publishing On the Origin of Species in 1859, and I have to say the phrase sent shockwaves feels almost like an understatement when you think about the impact this book had on Victorian society. It challenged these deeply held beliefs about the creation of life, humanity's role, and really our whole place in the universe.
It really did shake things up. But On the Origin of Species wasn't just some radical pamphlet. Darwin meticulously crafted his argument, building it on decades of meticulous observation and research. He laid out this idea that all life on Earth was connected through common descent, and that natural selection was the driving force behind the incredible diversity we see in the natural world.
It must have been both exhilarating and terrifying to finally release these ideas to the world. Do we know how Darwin felt about the potential fallout?
He definitely anticipated some pushback, but the sheer scale and intensity of the reaction was probably beyond anything he could have imagined. The book was an immediate success, selling out instantly. Multiple editions were printed, translations appeared in numerous languages. And suddenly, Darwin's ideas were being discussed everywhere, from scientific circles to everyday conversations. You even had people like Thomas Huxley, a great science communicator, bringing these ideas to the working class.
It's amazing to think about how rapidly these ideas spread. But I imagine the reactions were pretty mixed, right?
Oh, absolutely. There was this whole spectrum of responses. Some, like Huxley, were strong supporters, seeing Darwin's theory as a triumph of scientific reasoning over religious dogma. They really embraced the opportunity to challenge the scientific establishment, which at the time was still very much intertwined with traditional beliefs.
So what about the religious responses? I'm guessing On the Origin of Species didn't exactly make it on the church's recommended reading list?
Well, it's actually more complicated than that. Even within the Church of England, there were a variety of reactions. Some saw natural selection as fundamentally incompatible with divine creation, a direct contradiction of the Bible's account of Genesis. But others, like the clergyman Charles Kingsley, found ways to reconcile Darwin's ideas with their faith. Kingsley even wrote to Darwin praising his theory as just as noble a conception of deity as the traditional view of creation.
So it wasn't this simple battle of science versus religion.
Not at all. You had those who saw Darwin's work as evidence against a creator, while others saw it as revealing the intricate workings of God's plan. Even Darwin himself wrestled with these questions, his own faith shifting over time from traditional Christianity to a more agnostic perspective. In fact, he described himself as agnostic later in his life.
And speaking of those who opposed Darwin, we can't forget the famous 1860 Oxford evolution debate, the one with Bishop Wilberforce and Huxley's legendary retort. It feels like such a pivotal moment in the history of science.
It's definitely become a symbolic event. You have to imagine this packed hall tensions running high. Bishop Wilberforce, known for his public speaking skills, was arguing passionately against Darwin's theory and its implications for human origins. At one point, he supposedly turned to Huxley and asked whether it was through his grandfather or his grandmother that he claimed descent from an ape.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty personal attack. What did Huxley say?
He delivered this incredibly witty response that's become almost legendary. He supposedly stood up and said that he wouldn't be ashamed to have an ape for an ancestor, but that he would be ashamed to be connected with a man who used his great gifts to obscure the truth. It was a sharp retort and really captured the spirit of the debate for many people.
What a moment. But I guess even with those kinds of public exchanges, the debate itself was probably much more nuanced than a simple science wins narrative.
Exactly. The relationship between Darwin's ideas and religious faith continued to be a complex and evolving one.
So what about Darwin's later work? Didn't he eventually address human evolution directly?
He did. In 1871, he published The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. In this book, he tackled head-on the topic that had only been hinted at in On the Origin of Species, and presented evidence from a range of sources arguing that humans, like all other species, had evolved from earlier ancestors. He even explored the implications of this for how we understand human nature, morality, and society.
And he didn't avoid controversial topics like the differences between human races, did he?
He didn't shy away from those discussions, but it's important to understand his writing within the context of his time. While Darwin argued against ranking human races as distinct species and remained a staunch opponent of slavery, he did reflect some of the prevailing views on racial hierarchies that were common during the Victorian era. This part of his work has led to a lot of discussion and debate among scholars.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant scientific minds are products of their time and culture.
Absolutely, and it's something we need to engage with as we explore the history of scientific thought.
Darwin's work went far beyond just humans and animals, though, right? He had this whole other side to his research, a real fascination with plants.
He did. His work on orchids, carnivorous plants, and even the humble earthworm was groundbreaking. He was the first to really understand the significance of carnivory in plants. And his careful observations and experiments transformed our understanding of plant behavior and adaptation.
It's incredible to think about the breadth of his work. It really goes to show that he was a true naturalist, someone with this insatiable curiosity about the living world in all its forms.
And that's a key takeaway I hope we'll remember. Darwin's legacy isn't just about a single theory. It's about a way of seeing the world. It's about asking questions, being observant, and always searching for deeper understanding.
So if we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Charles Darwin, what are some final thoughts you would leave with our listener?
I think it's worth reflecting on Darwin's own words when he wrote about the grandeur in this view of life. What does that phrase mean to you, knowing the incredible journey of discovery that led him to that understanding? And what about the ways Darwin's ideas originally intended for the natural world have been applied to human society and the idea of progress? Have we always gotten that right? Or are there dangers in taking those scientific concepts too far? And finally, we've seen how Darwin was a product of his time expressing views that we might find problematic today. Does that diminish the impact of his scientific legacy? Or does it make his commitment to equality even more remarkable? These are questions worth considering as you continue to explore Darwin's work and the lasting impact of his ideas.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our expert for sharing these incredible insights into the life and work of Charles Darwin. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you'll continue to explore and engage with these ideas long after the episode ends.